like I said, it is very much concerned about how people with special ability are able to understand or navigate through the product, right? Um, Basically, in a very simple word, your usability, accessibility is actually part of usability.
Oh, right. Uh, so, as I correctly said, usability is a part of accessibility. So there is something called area, and do you really need for as a while designing this concept?
Before we jump there, I think
Hmm.
I would want to show something. Uh,
Sure, definitely.
so since we're talking about usability and accessibility, I'm, I just would want to mention everyone that, like, or maybe question everyone that have you guys ever seen any screen?
1 minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a video where a visually impaired woman is trying to show how she navigates through the iPhone that she is using.
Showing a little video of how a blind person would use an iPhone. So basically, you go to, you run your finger along the screen and you find what you're looking for. And there's like a little bit of a vibration, so it helps too. And it reads everything on the screen as you're going. And so then I open Twitter. And it's at the top of the Twitter page now. And I'm gonna compose a tweet. And normally you would use the regular keyboard here, but the iPhone also has this other keyboard where when you turn it, it's now I can braille and use a braille keyboard. So and so then I can read what I wrote. Using my iPhone. Voice recording. Text field is editing. I'm creating a tweet right now. I love using my iPhone. Character mode. Insertion. So I could share that if I want. But that's pretty much the idea. And so you double tap on anything to open it. And it'll bring up whatever. So
Yeah. This was a little glimpse of how people with visual impairment deal with the
Right.
or start try to use a particular device, right? Uh, you would have very peculiarly observed the way of engaging with the phone was quite different. The phone was talking. The phone was talking back to the user. They were holding it very close to the ear so that they can hear the instruction clearly, and they were also swiping through the device. They were heavily dependent on the gestures so that they can navigate from one button to another, and that is how they actually understand how the phone is functioning, right?
Right.
why why I particularly showed this, so that we can talk more about one of the factor that we Tushar, you just mentioned, ARIA, which is ARIA,
Hmm.
which basically stands for accessible rich internet applications. What are these rich applications? These applications are basically these are like attributes which helps to make the web content accessible to these kind of people who are visually impaired, right? You can add attributes to your buttons, your text, so that in case whenever they try to kind of instruction, right? So
Right.
basically an attribute which enables the internet applications to do that. And yes, it's actually very much required when we talk about accessibility, because like we saw in that video, uh, even if we miss one of the terms, one of the instructions behind one attribute, the end user might not be able to understand what's the next step or where the user should learn.
Right. I think that was the video was very so I think everyone should take care about this particular topic definitely. So then we come to, as you said, area, and it's very important to follow. But when you apply for web and mobile, so as I'm a designer, or I want to implement, or I want to follow it's like
Basically, when we talk about web and mobile, there are certain accessibility standards. And I think people would have read about WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is basically guidelines of accessibility, which anything which is surfaced on internet should need to be followed. They should follow that guidelines no matter what, to make the content accessible to all, right? Uh, Basically in the, and when we talk about app as well, since currently all the apps are also heavily internet based, heavily all their content is all surfaced through internet itself, they also need to very strongly align to the WCAG guidelines. These guidelines are these different levels and what do they hold. I'll share the link on the chat and I'll also share my screen.
right.
Yeah. So WCAG levels and what are the differences? So, like I said, there are three kind of levels in WCAG, which is A, double A, and triple A, and every time it becomes even more progressively stronger, progressively harder, basically. Like in level A, there is about 25-30 criteria that need to be met. Then when you move to next level, there are 13 more criteria. Those kind of criteria become much and much more important every time you move from any one level to another. So like here, what let's talk about the difference between these three CAG levels are. The success criteria at level A is designed to be easiest and to meet without much impact on the website design or structure, right? Uh, for example, at level A, you aren't allowed to identify something by color alone. Press the green button to proceed. So very basic guidelines around it, that maybe on the color part you can clear the single A criteria. We saw that only color can be defined as the guideline. If you are meeting the maybe the color contrast criteria on the CTA, that is enough. But when we come to double A, even the text becomes a little more important, that your text should follow a certain contrast ratio that it's much more readable to the end user, and that is how your double A standards become even more harder. And there are further more things like that. Similarly, I would suggest you guys can look at this particular web page. It will help you go through each of these levels in pretty much detail. But when we talk about mobile versus web, there are few things which becomes even more important when it comes to mobile accessibility in mobile devices. Very first thing is designing for different screen sizes. We all know that specifically in Android, the size of devices varies from like a standard 360 to 640 to a flip phone,
Right.
which is a completely different dimension. Samsung flip phone, right? So whenever we are designing for Android specifically, we should take care that all the guidelines which WCAG has mentioned should adhere on those different screen sizes as well. Then there has to be a very strong emphasis or very strong decision making around the touch targets and their placements. These touch targets are basically CTS. Wherever we are putting a CT or anything that we want user to tap on, maybe an icon button, we need to define a minimum uh, tap area of 9 mm by 9 mm, which basically translates into somewhere 34 to 36 pixel uh, in when it comes to Figma designs, right? Then there are certain scenarios while designing that where we want to put touch area, but there obviously we are not giving any CTA, right? Like icon buttons. So when we are talking about those kind of touch areas, we should give enough space around it so that it is easily tappable by the users. And one thing that is followed specifically for touch areas are that you should follow a consistency throughout. Like you would have observed throughout the most of the apps that are being developed, that there is a certain format that is being made a rule now that all your CTAs should be at the bottom. The reason is that it should be most easily accessible to the user, and also it makes a pattern in the user's mind that all the important CTAs are at the bottom. They're not flipping anywhere. Like when we talk about when I talk about the new designers, there are at times when people change their CTA position very frequently just based on the visual theming. They might move the CTAs to top, and maybe the next screen is somewhere in the middle of the screen. So that is not advisable. You should keep your CTAs, your touch targets at a fixed place itself. Then we should also think about the gestures very importantly. Like we saw in that video, that the women was very strongly dependent on the swipe gestures, right? Um so when we are designing for any mobile device, we should think about these gestures a lot. We are not make sure that we are not making these gestures too complicated, right? Through gestures anything can be possible. We can have three finger swipes. We can have a lot of complex gesture in place, but usually that is not advisable. We should try to keep gestures as minimal as possible and as straightforward as possible.
Right.
And then the layout should be consistent. For example, if we have designed a card which has a photograph on the left and the CT on the right, then we should try to use a similar layout throughout the application, so that once user has made that relationship that with every image there is a CTA, he would find it easier to find those CTAs in your screen. He would automatically identify that whenever there is an image like this, there's a CTA next to it, and it would be easy to operate around. Then, when we talk about mobile, one very important thing is how do you allow user to enter text, because your screen size is small. Whenever you try to type something, the keyboard comes in the screen as well, which takes about 40% of the screen area. So we should think about how wisely do we want to use that space. Can we give any alternate, maybe like right now we can use a lot of text to speech translation. We can use voice messages like what's WhatsApp has introduced, which is allowing users who cannot type easily to send their message across. And then last thing that which very importantly need to be noted when we are working on mobile devices is the color contrast. Since your screens are small and screen resolution and sizes varies from like almost extreme, they have a very extreme palette. We should double check on the contrast ratio of text that we are putting in, the CTS that we are putting in, and make sure all the images, the icons, everything is followed, and they all follow a certain contrast ratio which is mentioned in the WCAG guidelines. I'd share a link to the checklist which you guys can refer to at your own time, which can give you a quick glimpse around what all things that needs to be looked at or maybe taken care whenever we are designing for mobile devices. So
Sure.
I think you guys can use it.
Great. I think that covers pretty much my question. Now, next, I have see as UX practitioner, and every company has a different processes. Like some people follow UCD, design thinking, or design sprint. So, as a UX practitioner, where I should start this thought process, or it is in a research, or it is like when I doing a prototype. So no, what we you will advise there, for any kind of, I mean, if I follow agile UX or some, there are different protocols, procedures, and then you want to follow this accessibility process protocols also. So where we should fit this, and how you can suggest, and how they can follow this thing.
Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about it, how design practitioner should follow these kind of accessibility guidelines. So basically, to follow these kind of guidelines, very first thing that you need to develop is the empathy, right? The empathy and the
Right,
inclusive mindset. The empathy to understand how the other person is dealing with, right? I'm sure, like, looking at that video, a lot of people wouldn't have even imagined. Like when I saw those videos back about 2 to 3 years back, I was actually absolutely shocked to see that there is a completely different way to use these kind of application. I always was very fascinated looking at the accessibility features in my phone, but I never thought that how usable are they. So very first thing that as a designer that we need to develop is the empathy, right?
right,
Towards the people who are the audience whom we maybe neglect during our complete design process. Then the inclusive mindset. We need to understand that this is a basic right. Accessibility is basic right. Imagine that just because of any kind of a what do you call it, any kind of ailment, you are not allowed to enter a room, or you're not allowed to enter the mall. How humiliating, or how uh, discouraging that is, right? So we need to understand that as well, that everything that we are designing is inclusive, need to be inclusive. um, then we also need to think that this is our responsibility. Usually,
right,
whenever we are designing or chasing the timeline, these things are completely missed, right? Uh, so this is we need to take that this is our responsibility to think about those accessibility scenarios, and where to put or where to think about these things is basically in the design process, basically at almost every step, I would suggest. Even when we are researching, when we are creating personas, when we are thinking of a requirement from a user perspective, it is often ignored to think about people who have any kind of impairment, any kind of ailment. So right from the research phase, we need to think about the end users, right? We need to think about these kind of people who are our potential users, whom we completely ignore. And for even while testing the application, whenever we have prototypes ready, I recently just came across that Figma has launched an accessibility prototype plugin. I'll again share a link with you guys, which maybe you can use to create your prototypes much more and test your accessibility prototypes. I just came across, I think today only Figma has launched this. I came up
great,
uh, this small prototype. You can look at it. So I'll say these are the all stages, right from your research till your prototyping mode, when you are actually evaluating your end products with the final users. You need to look at these kind of, you need to consider accessibility as one of the very important feature. And question is, why not? Because basically studies mention that whenever you follow the accessibility guidelines, you not only make the whole app or whole product much more usable, or much more क्या कहते हैं, much more accessible to the regular user as well, right? So we should
right.
follow that.
Definitely. That leads to my next question. As we always talk about UX maturity, uh, how people are want to apply UX, and but still they are struggling. Same way, I think we should develop this maturity in, I think every companies and everything. How you see, how Indian IT scenarios or companies how willing to follow, because normal design development is one part, and if I ask some project managers to follow this thing, definitely they will reply me, oh, this is additional work for us. Right? So there are laws, definitely in some countries we have like section 508, strict laws there, but in Indian IT scenario, or how you will see, how people are applying this, or what is your experience in the world, how you find these things, right?
Uh, so talking about Indian IT industry, to be very frank, I'll say that not many companies, or I'll say only very small amount of companies are actually very serious about considering accessibility as part of their product. Uh, and like you mentioned, there are countries like Europe and all they who have very strict laws around accessibility. In
Right,
India, we have laws, but we don't consider that. One of the
right,
very important reason is uh, basically when we talk about people, the we are young nation, right? We don't have many people who are dealing with a lot of accessibility, a lot of accessibility related issues. If I talk about US, for example, a study says that about 20% of whole population is dealing with one or the other kind of accessibility related issues. That is where they for them this particular thing become really important. They understand that even by putting in a small amount of effort, a large number of audience will start using their product. Whereas when it comes to India, we are comparatively younger nation. Most of our population is in the working age, where they are healthier, and the people who are dealing with any kind of accessibility issue or any kind of disability is very less. It's hardly about 2% or 2 to 3%, as far as I remember, which basically puts them at a very minority state. So there are scenarios in IT industry where people just completely ignore them, saying that those people are not even our audience. Uh,
okay,
so, but like I said, this is the responsibility of a designer, that they should start thinking about it, start introducing these kind of features, these kind of, and these are very basic guidelines. You don't have to. They might look very difficult to implement, but in most of the coding languages, most of the development cycles, like Androids and all those languages, they provide all these kind of functionality at a very, what do you call it, the instructional level. It's just would
right,
have to put one function in place, and it will make things happen. You just have to be aware about it, that you need to put it. So just summarizing, that talking about Indian IT industries, Indian IT sector, we are actually nowhere. We are not considering it.
right. Hope we will improve on that part, and I think designers have to play very big role here. Okay, we have one question from Kiran. Can you share your experience that you have faced while you creating accessibility in Airtel app, or
Uh,
any other like?
so I can talk about not Airtel app. I can talk about my experience when I was working in Paytm. So, like I said, when it was kind of a shock to me when I first time realized that people who have visual, like there was a time when there was the whole demonetization happened, and each one of us was very strongly dependent on the uh, the apps like Paytm and all to conduct these kind of financial transactions. That was a time when I was doing this research to understand the payment pattern, the payment behavior of Indian audience, and that was a time when I first time came across a scenario where I saw a person with visual impairment using Paytm very efficiently, and I personally felt very ashamed when I saw that these attributes that we talk about are very wrongly placed in the app. It was just because of that sheer need that person learned to operate through the app. uh, that was quite kind of a shock for me. But after that, at least when I was in Paytm, I made that a part of my own KRA. What we did was we did a very extensive research. We even made a checklist of guidelines which we rolled across the Paytm, right from the developers to the design pods, where we gave a quick checklist around things that we need to take care, we need to think of while developing as well as designing. We made pamphlets out of it. We posted it. We put them on the we placed them on the desk of each of developers and uh, mm, each of the designers. And now Paytm is pretty much in a better shape. There are still little breaks here and there, but I was happy that Paytm at a very young stage adapted the accessibility.
Right. I think that was great. So we have one couple of questions. So what are the some basic exercise you would recommend a UX practitioner to tap into minds of user who uses accessibility services? Like,
Sorry, can you repeat that? I think I missed some.
what are some basic exercises you would recommend a UX practitioner to tap into minds of users who uses accessibility services? Basically, I think you want to talk about how practitioner would understand how uh, accessible as disabled people will use this. I
Yeah.
think you have covered a few things. Yeah,
One very important thing is, like I said, interact more with these kind of people, make them as part of your audience when we are initially researching or placing the personas in place, and also test the product with them, because
right,
we to be frank, it's very difficult to empathize or difficult to think about people who have visual impairments. We take our visual abilities for granted. We take our physical abilities for granted since we are very easily able to navigate through it. So we need to very seriously think about it, make it part of the complete design process. Like I said, test a lot. There are a lot of accessibility related tools available, a lot of accessibility related what do you call plugins available on Figma, which should be part of your checklist whenever we are preparing for handoff, whenever we are preparing a design file. We should make sure that these kind of checklist is there and you are also crossing it out, not just making sure that
right,
there. These are
right,
things that I still do. I still make sure, even when it comes to graphic design, when I are dealing with when I'm working with my team who deal into graphics, which are developed into pamphlets, which is shared to the people. We do look at a certain accessibility guidelines, and we look at the contrast ratio. We consider all those things, and then only proceed.
right. I think yes. We have one more interesting question from JC. I think it is talking about cognitive disabilities. So, apart from physical disabilities, have you ever encountered clients who have specific requests for catering for people with learning disabilities? Example, users with dyslexia. So, do you have any advice on what tools and everything?
So, to be frank, I haven't yet received an opportunity to work on any such kind of project, but yes, I have read about it. Uh, so, not I may not be able to give you a very in-depth insight around how to deal with it, but when it comes to people with any kind of learning disabilities, uh, we need to we need to design around the playfulness of the application. We need to make that learning process much more relatable. I think one of the movies that each one of would have seen talking about dyslexia was Tare Zameen Par, where we saw a small kid communicating more with his drawings than through letters, right? One of the examples of the similar app that I can think about is Duolingo. When we work on Duolingo, it's language teaching app, but it teach you everything through visual references. So one of the things that I can suggest while dealing with people who have dyslexia or are dealing with any kind of learning disability is to be much more visuals, much more relatable, so that the whole weightage of learning from words is little less on the end user.
Right. Let's take last few questions, and I think already it is like more than 50 minutes. So one more question is like, do you think there has to be a trigger to accessibility more on, or it should be a default on? So, and So there are any comprise in a consistency in order to implement or we take care of accessibility. So I think yes, it should has to be
Yeah.
default. Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, like while designing or building any product, this has to be considered. Like I said, there it has to be default by default. There, we need to, like I said, I've repeated a lot of time throughout this discussion that we need to very consciously think about these accessibility parameters that need to be in place. But when it comes to the end product, uh, like I said, there is a very small number of people, small number of population who find these feature actually usable. And we can directly relate to our parents as well. Like after a certain age, when they grow old, they they can't read the very small letter words. It's quite common that we would have seen that they would increase the text sizes, they would increase the contrast ratio in their phone so that they can read better through it. So this should be the trigger that Vikram just mentioned should be there and should also be made easily available, but may should not be default on the product and end product. But while designing, yes, it should be part of the default process.
Right. I think yes. I think I don't want to take your Sunday more time. I think
Sure, not a
we
problem.
have covered. You have covered pretty much a lot of things, and I hope even this discussion even trigger at least a thought process that whenever you are designing something, we should follow accessibility things and everything. Uh, yes, I think let's conclude today. And again, thanks, Manik, for today's time. We have covered so many things today. Uh, Stay connected, everyone. So we have very interesting talks, discussions happening. So our next talks is on about design thinking. So it is on 15 November. So please uh, try to register and let's explore more design thinking and everything. Once again, thanks everyone
Yeah,
for
thank you guys.
giving us a time and everything. Just take care and hope you should start following accessibilities very soon,
Yep.
very immediate in your work.
Yep. Thank
Thanks.
you
Take
guys.
care.
Thanks for your time. I'm leaving my LinkedIn link here. If you guys want
Definitely.
to talk more about accessibility or anything else any around UX, I would happy to take those questions. I know that we are already out of time today, but if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. I will be happy to answer those. Thank you guys. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you, this
Thanks.
thanks for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.